In 1882, a French agricultural engineer named Maximilien Ringelmann asked a group of men to pull on a rope as hard as they could. He measured the force. Then he added a second man, then a third, then a fourth, all the way up to 8. Logically, 8 men should pull with 8 times the force of one man. That's simple arithmetic, but that's not what happened. When Ringelmann tested one man alone, he pulled with 100% of his individual capacity. When he added a second man, the two of them together didn't pull with 200%. They pulled with about 93% each. With 3 men, each person's contribution dropped to 85%. By the time he got to 8 men, each individual was only pulling with about half the force they used when they were alone. The rope was getting more hands, but somehow less strength. Ringelmann had accidentally discovered something that would take psychologists almost a full century to fully explain. Something that quietly shapes offices, sports teams, classrooms, and governments to this day. Today it's called the Ringelmann Effect, and once you understand it, you will never look at a group project the same way again. Let's start with what Ringelmann actually thought was happening. His first assumption was mechanical. He figured the men were simply getting in each other's way. 8 people pulling on the same rope can't coordinate their timing perfectly. Some pull a split second early, some a split second late, and the force cancels itself out. Just like 8 people trying to walk through a doorway at the exact same moment. This is called coordination loss, and it's real. It does explain part of the drop. But in 1974, 2 psychologists named Alan Ingham and George Brawley decided to test whether coordination loss was the whole story. They ran a version of Ringelmann's experiment, but with a twist. They blindfolded the participants and told each person they were pulling a rope with a group of 5 or 6 other people. In reality, every single participant was pulling completely alone. There was no group. There was no coordination problem. There was nobody else on the rope at all, and the exact same drop in effort appeared. People who believed they were part of a group pulled significantly less hard than people who knew they were pulling alone, even though physically, nothing about the task had changed. The rope wasn't getting harder to coordinate. The people weren't bumping into each other. The only thing that changed was a belief. The belief that somebody else was also pulling. This ruled out Ringelmann's original theory. The drop wasn't mechanical, it was psychological. Researchers gave it a name. Motivation loss, or what would later become famous as social loafing. In 1979, 2 social psychologists at Ohio State University, Bibb Latané, Kip Williams, and Stephen Harkins, published one of the most cited studies in the field. They asked participants to shout and clap as loudly as they could, alone, in pairs, and in groups of up to 6. Everyone was told the group's total noise was being measured together. Just like Ringelmann's ropes, the results collapsed the bigger the group got. 2 people together produced about 71% of the effort of 2 people yelling alone. 6 people together produced barely 40% of what 6 individuals yelling alone would produce. Latané called this diffusion of responsibility, when your individual contribution disappears into a collective outcome, and nobody can tell exactly how much you personally added. Some part of your brain quietly decides that less effort is acceptable. Nobody is lazy on purpose. Nobody consciously decides to slack off. The drop happens below the level of conscious intention, which is exactly what makes it so dangerous. Because here's the unsettling part. This isn't a flaw in a handful of unmotivated people. It's a predictable mathematical curve that shows up in almost every group task ever studied, across cultures, across age groups, across genders. The bigger the group, the smaller the average individual output every single time. Researchers have found the same pattern in tug-of-war teams, in group brainstorming sessions, in orchestras, in factory assembly lines, and in something as simple as clapping at a concert. A 1993 study on group brainstorming found that 4 people working together as a group produced fewer usable ideas than 4 people working separately and combining their answers afterward. The group wasn't just less efficient, it was less creative because each individual quietly reduced their own mental effort, assuming someone else in the room would cover the gap. It also shows up in something you've probably felt yourself without ever naming it. Ever been on a group project where the workload somehow always seems to fall on 2 or 3 people, while everyone else contributes just enough to not get noticed? That's not a coincidence, and it's usually not because those other people are bad or dishonest. Their brains are running an ancient calculation. If my individual effort is invisible inside the total, and someone else can absorb the shortfall, why push at maximum output? But the Ringelmann effect has a strange exception, and this is the part almost nobody talks about. In 1993, researchers Carrow and Williams reviewed over 78 different studies on social loafing and found the effect nearly disappears under specific conditions. When individual contributions can be clearly identified and measured, the effect vanishes. When the task is meaningful or personally important to the person doing it, the effect shrinks dramatically. When group members know and trust each other and feel their unique effort actually matters to the outcome, some people even work harder in groups than they do alone. This is called social compensation, and it happens when a person feels the group might fail without them specifically. So the Ringelmann effect isn't really about groups being bad. It's about invisibility. It's about what happens to human effort the moment nobody can tell exactly how much of it came from you. This has enormous implications far outside a laboratory. Modern companies have restructured entire departments around this single finding. Some of the most productive tech teams in the world deliberately keep teams small, often citing what's internally called the two-pizza rule. If a team can't be fed with 2 pizzas, it's too big to be accountable. Military units have long understood something similar. Elite special forces teams are kept deliberately small, not just for stealth, but because in a unit of 4 to 6 people, every single person's contribution is visible to everyone else. There is nowhere to hide effort, and nowhere for effort to quietly evaporate. Even democracy itself runs into this problem. Political scientists have used the Ringelmann effect to explain a phenomenon called rational ignorance, the tendency for individual voters to invest less time researching candidates and policies as the size of the electorate grows. If your one vote is statistically diluted among millions, some part of the brain quietly concludes that the personal cost of deep research isn't worth it, because the outcome barely depends on you specifically. Nobody decided democracy should work this way. It's the same rope, just with a country attached to it instead of 8 men. And there's a darker cousin sitting right next to the Ringelmann effect that many researchers believe is connected. The bystander effect, the well-documented tendency for people to be less likely to help someone in an emergency when more witnesses are present, follows an almost identical psychological pattern. When responsibility is shared among a crowd, each individual assumes someone else will act. The larger the crowd, the smaller the odds that any single person actually does anything at all. Ringelmann discovered a rope losing strength. Decades later, psychologists realized the same invisible math applies to something far more serious than force output. It applies to whether a stranger gets help. So what do you do with this, knowing what you now know? The next time you're in a meeting, a group chat, a team project, or a crowd watching something go wrong, ask yourself one simple question. Can anyone actually tell how much I personally contributed to this? If the honest answer is no, that is exactly the condition under which your own effort is statistically most likely to quietly shrink, without you ever consciously deciding to let it. Ringelmann never got to see how far his rope would stretch. He was studying farm equipment efficiency, not human psychology. He had no idea he'd stumbled onto a force that would explain slacking coworkers, silent bystanders, disengaged citizens, and underperforming teams more than a century later. He just saw 8 men holding a rope, pulling less than 1 man alone ever could. The rope hasn't changed since 1882. We're still holding it. The only question is whether anyone can actually see your hands on it.